we got to address an elephant in the room here, which unfortunately many people aren't even aware of. We're going to make you aware of it today. And that is, what in the hell is wrong with American generalship? Because we keep getting it wrong at the highest levels for so long. I've shown you several clips recently from General Cavoli, who's been saying lots of things that just are not backed up by what we see on the ground. And earlier this week, we had Larry Johnson on, who made a certain comment that sparked my interest. And the more I've thought about this, the more I think, yeah, this is something that really needs to be discussed.
That would be a great video to superimpose, to play and contrast, and then go back and pick up, I don't know if there's any good video footage of Westmoreland out of Vietnam.
Oh,
I guess all these guys take that class at West Point, how to lie your ass off to Congress.
Yeah, Gary's an amazing guy. I bet he'll, before the show's over, he'll probably come up with all three of those, man. Well, it wasn't just before the show was over exactly, but sure enough, we were able to come up with a lot of clips here. And listen, I just want to put some things together. Larry mentioned there General Westmoreland from the Vietnam War. He mentioned David Petraeus from the Afghanistan War, and then Cavoli from this one. So in light of what we saw from Keith Kellogg yesterday and what he said at the Times of London, et cetera, let's take a look at what Larry was talking about here. This is like the epitome of the most famous American generals from 1967 on forward. First, let's look at what happened before a joint session of Congress in April of 1967.
Backed at home by resolve, confidence, patience, determination, and continued support, we will prevail in Vietnam over the communist aggressor.
Oh, yeah, all those applause. We will succeed. How did that work out? Now, listen, you might be tempted to think, well, maybe that was true in 1967 because we finally got out totally. I think it was 1972, 73 when, they had the really infamous Saigon picture where the helicopter was leaving with the last of the people. That's how ugly it turned out. But the truth was known at the time he made that. It was self-evident that we were not going to win militarily. It was clear. It didn't matter how much firepower we had. It didn't matter how many bombs, how many jets. The North Vietnamese enemy we were fighting at the time was a peasant army. They had actually most of their air power came from the Soviet Union, what they did have in the air, but the North Vietnamese themselves had virtually none. And yet they were willing to make the sacrifice on the ground to be able to win, no matter what we were able to impose of a cost. It was an existential issue to them, and they were willing to pay it because it was their literal livelihood on the line. Whereas for us, it was half a world away. Most people in America had never heard of it. We weren't going to be able to sustain the cost that it was going to be on American troops, et cetera. It was self-evident at the time, but that's what our generalship said. That was what was said. The president wanted to hear that, so that's exactly what he got. But reality will eventually impose itself on top of your preference. This is the key. You keep hearing me talk about this every time we've ever been on this air. We've been talking about this forever, which is what is going on the ground. The ground truth must be acknowledged. If you don't pay attention to the ground truth and you try to make policies based on the fiction you've chosen to create, eventually, at some point, those two things are going to clash and reality will always win. That's what happened in Vietnam. That's also what happened in Afghanistan. Here is this from the ever-popular General David Petraeus in March of 2011.
As a bottom line up front, it is ISAF's assessment that the momentum achieved by the Taliban in Afghanistan since 2005 has been arrested in much of the country and reversed in a number of important areas. Of note as well, the progress achieved has put us on the right azimuth to accomplish the objective agreed upon at last November's Lisbon summit, that of Afghan forces in the lead throughout the country by the end of 2014.
Okay, so now if I can say, because of what I've read from the Vietnam War history, that even at the time he made that comment that it was known that we were not going to win that war, I don't have to worry about reading anything from this one. I was on the ground in March of 2011. When he made that speech, I was in Afghanistan. I was part of the surge that he was bragging about in that speech, saying that we had arrested Taliban momentum, we were on the right azimuth, and all the stuff that he said on that. I knew for a fact that it was a lie. In fact, that's one of the things that drove me, that and the cost to the American soldiers of other generals who had lied during the time and claimed great victories when I knew for a fact on the ground were actually losses and failures. And yet you see every newspaper reported that, because that's what the president at the time wanted. That's what Obama wanted. He wanted a victory. He called that the good war. The Afghan was the good war. The Iraq war was the dumb war that he wanted to get out of. And he ended up not getting out of that either, or getting back into it even before he left office. But the bottom line is that the general, along with many other generals, and I've written on this extensively at the time. You can Google, Davis and generals, and you'll find quite a bit of things that I wrote. But the fact is, they lied to us. They didn't misrepresent the truth. They didn't just give an optimistic view. It was a lie. They knew that those things weren't true, and yet they had them. And if you need any question about that, you don't have to take my word for it. But in 2019, the Washington Post came out with the Afghanistan Papers, where they chronicled even more lies than I had talked about there. But it is validated. And yet, we keep listening to the guy. He still goes on television to this day. I've showed you many times a comment that he made to the BBC in May 31st, to be specific, of 2023, when he went out and told everybody how the Ukraine army, in great detail, it was actually a long clip that we've used, where he said that they're going to, they have a combined arms operation. They have trained. They have gotten all this equipment from the West. They really understand what they're doing. They have intelligence from the West, and the Russian side will crumble and might even collapse. And they may go all the way to the Azov coast. And of course, the exact opposite happened, whereas the Ukraine side didn't even break the first line of Russian defense. They got up to the first of 5 lines and never made it beyond that. And they've been on the back end ever since that time. Russia stopped the offensive, and then a few months later started their own, and it's continued on to this day, 2025. And yet we still listen to him. He still goes on major news media networks periodically. He still goes as an expert that's given all kinds of praise by the people that are interviewing him. And you see on the ground, you see chronicled this terrible record of the generals keep saying things that don't come to pass. And you just have to wonder, at what point are we finally going to wake up and recognize that what is said with these guys' mouths and all these chest medals on their chest and stuff doesn't happen on the ground. And so that's where we are today. I keep showing to you the reality. We show you what people are saying on the Russian side, on the Ukraine side, on the American side, the European side. We give you all of it in context, and we always go back to the map. This is the reality. This is where things are going right now. Here's the death toll on the Ukraine side. Here's the casualty counts on the Russian side. I'm telling you the whole picture. We're not making anything pretty or ugly or anything else. We're just saying this is what is, and these are the logical ramifications of that. But it's not just Westmoreland. It's not just David Petraeus and all those guys from his generation. It's the current generation. So here is what actually prompted Larry Johnson to make that comment, is what General Cavoli said in testimony before the United States Congress.
There's nothing inevitable in war. And the Ukrainians are in very strong defensive positions right now and are improving weekly their ability to generate force and to reinforce those positions. It is hard sitting here right now to envision a major Ukrainian offensive that clears everybody, out of every square inch of Ukraine. But likewise, it's very hard to envision Ukraine collapsing and losing that conflict. I do not think there's an inevitability to a Ukrainian loss.
It's hard to imagine a Ukraine offensive to clear out everybody back to the 1991 borders. I mean, that is absurd. That is nonsense. It's not hard. It's impossible. They tried it. The Ukrainians tried it when they had months of time to prepare, when they still had a lot of guys with experience that they had trained for the previous 8 years prior to the war breaking out. Then they had all the training, physical training on NATO territory, even in large units at some points. They had the intelligence from the West. They had thousands upon thousands of combat vehicles, tanks, armor personnel carriers, air defense batteries, missiles, air defense missiles, everything you can imagine, millions of rounds of artillery shells, 500 million, that's an actual number, of bullets of all different kind of calibers to go in machine guns, small arms fire, etc. 500 million. And what happened in 2023 when they did this, when they attempted to do what he said? They broke their teeth on the first row. And now then they've been on the back ever since. Now then they're digging into the bottom of the barrel. They're now going after basically teenagers in their country. And you say it's hard? It's impossible. You say there's nothing inevitable in war? Oh yeah, there is something inevitable. And even after the Battle of Kursk, I think late 1943, on the Eastern Front between the Nazis and the Soviet Union, it was inevitable that Germany was going to lose after that. There was very practical reasons why: manpower issues, the fact that there was another front that had been opened up or would be opened up by the Allies in the West, and then the fact that the Soviets had fully mobilized everything, and they were willing to spend, like the North Vietnamese, they were willing to spend whatever personnel it took in order to get that won. And it was inevitable at that point. But the Germans kept fighting anyway until finally the reality played in, and it played out according to what the logic of military science would say. And that's what he's not willing to recognize. He's saying what is popular. He's probably saying what, even if no one told him what to say, he's saying what he thinks is he's supposed to say, given the political realities or whatever. I can only speculate on what may have been his motivation. He can only speak to that for himself. But what I can tell you for sure is the stuff that he's saying, like David Petraeus in 2011, like Westmoreland in 1967, it's not connected to reality on the ground. I mean, I could just show you right there that's tangible reality, the recent history. And he's saying it's hard. He should have said there is no way that they're going to be able to drive back to the 1991 borders. He should have said there's no way, and said, well, it's hard. But then he used the same language to say, but it's also hard to see them losing. No, it's not. Now, this is a future issue, so you can't ever say with absolute certainty. No one can. But it is extremely likely, to the point of almost impossible to imagine any other outcome, that if the war continues on, the Ukraine side does not have the capacity to resist this indefinitely. There is an end, just like there was when David Petraeus said that in 2011, and then it took 10 years in that case, but the inevitability played out and we lost. Westmoreland said in 1967 they were going to win. It still took another, I guess it was 5 to 6 years after that before we lost and left in disgrace. And the same thing awaits us here. The same fundamentals which made those two things likely to the highest degree are also in place right now that make it likely to the highest degree. If Russia continues to fight at the level they're doing right now, even if they don't have a bigger mobilization, it's inevitable that they're going to crush the Ukraine side. It's simple math. It's simple dynamics of human behavior. You can't keep fighting a war that you have the lower inputs on. Go back again to Alex Verschinin's 2024, I believe, Royal United Services Institute, RUSI. He did this incredible analysis. If you want to know how attrition warfare works, and upon one of the things that I base what my projections are here and played out precisely in those other two conflicts that I just pointed out to you, read that article. Maybe General Cavoli should read that article. Unfortunately, he doesn't seem to pay any attention to that, at the demise and the cost of the Ukraine people, of the Ukraine armed forces, and of American interest. If he was just being honest, he would say some version of what I could say, or what I have just said, because that's the truth as demonstrated on the ground. There's nothing wrong with telling the truth. Even in congressional hearings, even if it's not what anybody wants to hear, it's the truth. And if these people who listen to that make decisions, if the president of the United States listens to that and believes it, he may make different policy choices thinking that what you said is true. He may think, well, okay, I mean, if the Ukraine side is not going to lose, maybe I can put more pressure on Russia and not agree to all the territory they may want, because they can't win anyway, and eventually the cost will be too high. You may be tempted to think that, but that's not what's actually the ground says. That's not what an analysis of the balance of power on the two sides and the forces between the two sides and the inputs that are available to the two sides says. So now maybe Trump is not going to be falling for that. And maybe that's the reason why Witkoff is talking about this. Maybe what John Helmer reported was true, and the fact that because that was back in February. And if Steve Witkoff went up there yesterday, and that is what they're talking about, then that may be indication that Trump is believing the truth, and he's recognizing what's going on the ground, and he may be close to making a deal. Now, we have big issues with that, of course, because diplomatically, politically, and internationally, that's going to cause the Ukraine side to have to come to a decision point, which I mentioned at the beginning. They're either going to have to accept whatever Trump is willing to do with Russia, or they're going to go it on their own. And that's another hard thing that Trump probably has the decision point coming up soon. If Zelensky sticks with his current path and his current claims, that Trump may have to say, all right, I've outlined this. I've agreed to this with Russia. This can end the war. Our support stops on this day. Either you agree to it or you don't. If you don't, you're a sovereign country. You're the leader of your country. You can make whatever decisions you want. You'll do it without any American bombs, missiles, or bullets. That's just what you're going to have to say. And that'll be a hard one to do because he'll be accused of all kinds of things, et cetera. But it's the right call, and history will look well on somebody making that hard, right call. We'll have to wait and see how it's going to work out. But the next time you hear a general saying something that doesn't seem to line up with reality that you can observe, you're smarter than you may think. And so now you know. But anyway, we appreciate you. We appreciate Larry Johnson bringing that up. We appreciate Gary talking about it. And in fact, actually, before we get off, I think it's important to bring Gary in here since he put some of this together. I know we talk about a lot of this stuff off the air, and people deserve to know about kind of what's going on behind the scenes here.
Yeah, Danny, I love that you connected the dots like that. I mean, going back to '67, who knows if it was even going on before that? You know, thankfully with the way the media is today and all the availability we have, that we can go back, grab those videos from before, and then what we have from Cavoli just in the last 2 weeks. He testified last week and this week. It really went under the radar. I think I didn't see it much anywhere. It was maybe covered, but that's why I'm so glad that we covered it, to hear this guy and what he was saying and how contrary it was to what Trump's vision is. And and the way that you had said that and illustrated what these gentlemen are doing, they're not stupid people. They're not stupid people, and yet they're willing to say what they've been saying. Does it not only? I don't know what else to attribute it to except the power, the influence of the military-industrial complex, the power and the influence of the defense industry to drive these men to say these things. Because, as you say, you look at the battlefield and it's contrary to what's going on the ground. So why would you dare go in the direction that you're going with and promote a continual battle to continue?
You know, it's even more ironic because you may recall that there's one point, and I think this was actually in his prepared testimony, in his introductory remarks before the Senate, that I don't think he actually said out loud during the testimony. But what he wrote in there was that I talk about the balance of power all the time. On the Russian industrial capacity side, he said they will be able to make 1,500 armored vehicles of various types this year. And I forget the number of artillery shells that he's quantified in there that they could make, which dwarfs everything the combined total of all the Western countries can put together, and the manpower he talked about. And then you want to say that you don't see a path for the Ukraine to lose when you know they can't match any of that stuff. It's harder to reconcile the mention of those things. Even when he talked about the Russians, you may recall, I think we did mention this, that he said, yeah, sure, that they're doing better here and they've made some improvements, but you remember that thing. But overall, the Russian side is going down, 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 and the Ukraine side is improving. And I just like, why would you say that when you yourself just gave the inputs to why the Russian side is winning?
You know, Danny, it's almost like he wants to go down with the ship, to the very last drop. He'll just keep, holding on to that. And I can only think that if he's not getting direct compensation, there's some kind of agreement there with the defense industry that he's willing to keep playing that role for them. He's basically their spokesperson.
And I always hesitate to accept that, but it's harder and harder not to have that. I know you show all the time that picture from December of 2023, I think, when Zelensky's surrounded by all the defense industry guys.
Danny, I keep this picture in my back pocket.
Yeah, that's the one.
Because it says so much. It says so much.
All those smiling faces. We're talking about war. I mean, they're not even putting on the pretend that it's a grim situation and we're trying to help out. It's gleeful. It's joyous. Yay! We get more war. Okay, so we're rolling out towards maybe 2 years from that date, and the stocks probably are doing well. The contracts keep coming. Now we'll see what happens now because Trump hasn't offered any new money, so there's no new contracts for them. But there sure are in Europe. With this new package they just showed, those got to come from somewhere. So if it's the industrial complex here or there, maybe even a combination, because I know that a lot of the industrial capacity is very limited in Europe. So even if they pass money, some of those contracts are coming this way.
Well, I was just going to say, you can be sure and through whatever back channels or whatever it takes that, just because it's whatever France supplying or Germany supplying it, that the manufacturer isn't actually here on our side of things. So my gosh, that the web is that tangled that things can weave in and out and go in every direction like that. So for sure, just because it's not mentioned that it's the U.S. supplying it, it could easily be our manufacturing that is behind their supplying it.
And the sad thing is, on the one hand, we might like to say, well, like in these other two cases, time and reality will impose themselves, and this thing will come to an end, and it will be exposed about how this thing wasn't, that these things were never true. But now it took a long time, but Westmoreland was eventually humiliated and publicly shamed, but it was many years afterwards. It hadn't happened yet with Petraeus. To this day, he's still lionized.
Come on, Danny, we probably, I don't know, but at least once a month and sometimes twice in a week. Yeah,
because he keeps getting put on. He keeps getting put out there. So
that's what I mean. Yeah, he's revered. He's held up. He's for them, he's just, he's the perfect spokesman for the industry for sure. Obviously, right? And he always has been. And it seems like.
One thing I'm going to follow is that during this testimony, Cavoli mentioned that this is his last time to address Congress because he's going to retire and resign. And I'm going to be real interested to see where he lands up. Which defense contractor does he go to work for? How much money is he going to make? What's he going to do after that? And I bet.
Come on, we'd be shocked if he ended somewhere else, if he's not going to be on the board somewhere, just the way Petraeus is, on this very day. Has Austin landed anywhere? Do we know?
I haven't looked, but it's worth looking because I have great.
Really?
He came out of the defense industrial complex. He was on the boards of whatever before that. I can't imagine he's done anything besides that. Actually, are you looking up right now?
Well, that's our job. That's our next special, Danny. Is to track these guys.
Where are they going?
Put somebody on their tail.
We do, because we're all about transparency and calling out the truth wherever it lands, and we're going to do that here. But anyway, it's just discouraging because whatever the motivation is, I bet there aren't many, and I won't say none, but I bet there aren't many that say, you know what, I'm going to keep advocating this because I want cash in my back pocket. I don't care how many Ukrainian people die, but it's too easy, I think, for these guys to say, no, as long as they want to fight, it's our responsibility to give them the weapons and the tools that they need. Now, I wouldn't do it, but if they want to, who are we to say no to it? And you can give yourself all the salve on that, but that's thin gruel to me, because that's you trying to convince yourself because your eyes can certainly see the truth.
I agree, Danny. Listen, the money is too good to say no to. So with the thin veneer of what you just described, they're willing to hold up. They'll take that thin veneer. My gosh. Again, because the money's so good. The veneer is thick enough for me.
Yeah. And if anybody who cared about, humanity actually cared about the Ukrainian people, we would have ended this long, long ago. But I don't want to rehash that stuff I've said before. But anyway, you can continue to count on Daniel Davis Deep Dive with Gary and I. We're going to continue to bring you the truth, no matter what it is, because we are unintimidated, uncompromised, as Gary Shirt says right there, because that's kind of our thing. We want to do that no matter where it leads, because you deserve to know. So thank you very much, you guys. I hope you have a great weekend. We'll look forward to seeing you with a new set of shows to bring you new truth starting Monday morning. See you then.
Amen. Bye.